Everyone who has ever arrived in the Saratov region by train from Volgograd knows this building's silhouette. The majestic cathedral in neo-Gothic style, built in 1906 in the German settlement of Kamenka, became a well-known symbol on the Volga. The size of the cathedral is very impressive, and it seems completely out of place in its surroundings. One wonders, why was such a grand structure erected in an ordinary village on the outskirts of the province? But perhaps it was not quite ordinary. The German colony of Bähr, now Kamenka, was founded on July 7, 1765, with the main occupation of the settlers being agriculture. Despite the unfamiliar climate, the very dry summers, and the snow-poor, frosty winters, the German settlers were successful in agriculture. Soon mills were built around the village, and the village grew steadily. In the beginning there were 42 families, and within 100 years their number increased almost tenfold. In Kamenka, markets and fairs were held regularly. There were shops and even a pub with an ice cellar and awning. In 1891 there was a public hospital and ambulance with 10 beds, women's and veterinary stations. 5 doctors, medical assistants, midwives and a veterinarian worked here. A public post station and a telegraph were set up. The secret of the success of the German settlers in Kamenka may have been based on their faith. The influence of the Catholic community on everyday life had been very significant. On the one hand, there were many strict rules. No one was allowed to marry or even celebrate without the consent of the priest. On the other hand, the regulated community life led to effective work organization. Be that as it may, fact remains fact. At the beginning of the 20th century, Kamenka was one of the wealthiest settlements in the area. To thank God for their well-being, the resistance built a unique, magnificent cathedral. The well-known civil engineer at the time, König from Katharinenstadt, supervised the construction of the church, which was built according to the latest architectural standards. The architecture was more urban than provincial. Airy light towers, sharply pointed spires, and impressive details. Fine facade elements made of red brick and a strict and bright interior, which the architect discussed with the priest and the community, became the pride of the inhabitants. On October 26, 1906, the House of God was consecrated on the occasion of the birth of the Holiest Mother of God. Kamenka was an educational and religious center. After Napoleon's Russian campaign in 1812, prisoners of war who wanted to stay in Russia were accommodated here. The son of one of them, Heinrich Matz, opened the first private school here, later known as the School of Old Matz. This private cooperative educational institution introduced extended lessons in many subjects, including Latin and Russian, and was considered one of the best in the district. Not only did residents and inspectors speak positively about it, the governor did as well. At the initiative of Father Nakutovich, the church school for the training of organists and schoolmasters, i.e. teachers, became known beyond the borders and was founded in Kamenka in 1848. Teachers and clergymen belonged to the class with the highest level of education at the time and helped the settlers solve various problems. Teacher Braun introduced nature treatment with healing water in 1840, and on February 17, 1896, the Assembly of the Kamenka district decided to open a reading room. The first library in the village had 47 book titles, but only a total of 105 copies, including textbooks on Russian history, literature, geography, zoology, and agriculture. There was also a school for the training of clergymen. However, textbooks were scarce. Father Nakutovich partly procured the books at his own expense and distributed them in the parish schools of the district. The Soviet government completely reformed the education system. They closed all educational institutions and created an elementary school and a 7th grade school, which was later converted into a secondary school. However, many teachers continued to work. In the 1930s, some of them were suppressed, as were more than 100 inhabitants of the village. The repressions were accompanied by religious persecution. The last clergyman of the parish, Leonhard Eberle, was arrested by the Bolsheviks in 1929 and banished for 3 years, but he was released prematurely in 1930. However, shortly after he returned to Kamenka, he was arrested again as a part of a group trial against the German Catholic clergyman and eventually sentenced to 5 years at a re-education labor camp. The church was closed and the building was turned into a tractor plant. After the deportation of the Germans in 1941, the Soviets transformed the settlement into a re-education labor camp, which existed until 1944. Only after the war did Kamenka become an ordinary village again, but now without Germans. Many of their houses still stand here today, and it seems as if time has stood still. The church ruin is in a miserable state, but with its special tragic beauty, it still attracts tourists. It is difficult to say whether this architectural masterpiece can be restored. Urgent measures are needed to prevent further destruction, so that the cathedral can remain as a monument to the bright and tragic history of an entire ethnic group.